James Murray here from the Birchup Cropping Group. Here about 15 k's northwest of Pyramid Hill at our Southern Pulse Agronomy trial site in the north central region of Victoria. So at this site we've got a range of different varieties of peas, lentils, faba beans, chickpeas and also vetch. So we're trying to identify some different traits and varieties that are suited to these fairly unique soil constraints in this environment, so that being salinity and also acidic soils. So we've got 2 sowing dates out at the trial site here, so one of them being early May and then sort of that 3rd to 4th week of May. So unfortunately we can't have too many people out here to have a look around the site, but yeah, today Brooke, Claire and myself will give you a bit of a virtual tour of what we're doing in this region. Yeah, so here's our field pea variety by time of sowing trial. So a couple of new varieties we've got in here. So GIA Castar here and GIA Ourstar over here. So these are some of the newer Group B tolerant field peas that are starting to come to market. So here we've got PBA Wharton. So here we've got it sowing on the early May sowing date, and here we've got late May sowing date. So yeah, the Wharton here is really starting to pod up already, and yeah, this later sowing stuff's only just starting to sort of finish flowering is now that first sort of pod poking through. So some really good biomass differences between those 2 sowing dates, and yeah, significant potential. So here we've got some lentils, again those same sowing dates, so early May and late May. So we've got PBA Bolt to my right, PBA Hallmark to my centre here, so they were both sown the early May, and then PBA Bolt sown that late May period. So yeah, really fantastic looking lentil crops in some areas where they're not traditionally grown. It'll be really interesting to see what grain yields we get from these this year. There's massive potential here with these potting up really well, so it'll be interesting to see how we go. Yeah, so here we've got Vetch sowing date trial. So we've got Popney and Morava sowing early May. So one of the really big challenges around vetch hay production is targeting this maturity length of the variety you're growing, and then the consequent cutting date and baling date of that variety. So obviously in the southern rainfall environment, we try and push that cutting date as late as possible to get really good curing conditions. So yeah, a very late variety such as Popney really shifts that cutting date later, whereas Morava slightly earlier but still longer than some of its quicker counterparts. So it's a bit of a mix and match management sort of decision around yeah, some dry seasons and quicker maturing varieties versus some of these longer seasons and wetter springs where a longer maturing variety such as Popney may do pretty well. Yeah, so here we've got Popney and Morava once again, but now sowing at that late May sowing date, so not overly practical, but yeah, good to see nonetheless. So Popney here really only just starting to flower, and Morava sort of around that mid-flowering time. When sown, that's so much later. So a lot less biomass, but yeah, later maturing also. So here we've got Timic and RM4, again at that early sown date, early May. So RM4 is a newish woolly pod vetch, so yeah, you can see the flowers there, so it's sort of that mid to late maturing, not quite as long as Popney, but yeah, that later maturing stuff. Then we've got Timic here, which is classed as a mid, yeah, and probably the quickest you would want to get in this environment. So you can see Timic here is well and truly potting up already. Now I'm joined by Brooke Bennett here, a Research and Extension Officer with the Birchup Cropping Group. So we're standing in a vetch disease management trial. Brooke, do you want to tell me what varieties you're growing in this trial?
Yep, so we've got 2 varieties in this trial. We've got Popney here and then Timic to my left. So two varieties have quite different maturity. So Popany is quite late, very late. As you can see, it's still got a lot of flowers on it and not quite potting up yet. And then we've got Timic, which you can see finished flowering and has got a lot of flat pod formation happening there.
So sowing date's a pretty important factor when it comes to managing disease. So you got 2 sowing dates in this trial, I understand?
Yeah, so similar to the time sowing with the variety stuff, we've sown start of May and then towards the end of May.
And have you got any comment around canopy closure, when that was reached roughly, and any impact that may have on managing disease?
Yeah, so that first time of sowing reached canopy closure quicker, which means that that would have been the perfect kind of environment for the disease to get going. If we had had that season, that would have been conducive for that, but as we know, we had quite a dry winter and a bit of a dry spring really, so we haven't really seen that disease.
And you've also got some fungicide treatments in here, so what fungicides have you used and why have you chosen those fungicides?
Yeah, so we've gone with carbendazim, which is kind of standard practice I guess, and we put that out just prior to canopy closure.
How about you take us through and give us a bit of a look at some of the disease development that's happened in this trial? I know it's not all that great, but it'll still be interesting to go and have a look.
So we're just here in a Timic early sown plot with no fungicide applied, and you can just see here we've got a little bit of what was a bit of botrytis grey mould. You can kind of see the dying off leaves, but as you can see, it's dried out a lot, and because we've had those dry conditions, the disease hasn't kept going. So we've taken cuts at hay cut timing, so flat pod formation, to compare the different disease management strategies.
So Brooke, now we're in a gibberellic acid trial, so for a start off, do you want to tell me what gibberellic acid is?
Yep, so gibberellic acid, or GA, is a hormone that plants naturally produce, so all the crops that we grow produce it, and what it kind of does is it promotes the cell elongation. So it's kind of what's behind that flush of growth we see in spring as the weather starts to warm up.
Application date, so what product have you applied, when did you apply it, and yeah, how did you go about making those decisions?
Yeah, so we've used Gala is the product name, and we decided to have 2 timings. So we put one application out at the end of July. So we were kind of targeting there, thinking if we could go in winter where there's not a lot of that growth, maybe we could get that growth happening earlier, was kind of the theory behind that one. And then we also had a second timing, which was the start of September. And that one's kind of targeting what growers are kind of trying, and that one's approximately 3 to 4 weeks prior to hay cut timing, and so that one potentially that could be getting that height up there, and that could be improving the harvestability for that cut 4 weeks later. And then we also have some plots that got both of those treatments, and then our nil treatment obviously as well.
Yeah, Brooke, so I understand a lot of growers are playing around with this sort of stuff in their vetch hay crops. Do you want to tell me a bit about why you've gone about establishing this trial?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, growers are using this a little bit, but there's basically no research behind. There's no research around GA and how it actually helps the vetch crops. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence. Growers are seeing things. There's potential to be biomass increases. Some growers are seeing an improvement in harvestability, as well as possibly a delay in flowering. But we just really wanted to get a trial in and really have a look at, I guess, the data around this and see if if GA is a tool that growers should be considering.
So Brooke, you mentioned some biomass responses that plenty of people are seeing when they're applying this stuff. Have you got any early observations of what you've seen out here so far? I know it's only partway through, but anything early that's indicating good, bad or indifferent?
Yeah, so we've been taking assessments since the first application. So we've been taking height measurements every couple of weeks, and we took some biomass cuts 4 weeks after the first application to see if there were any differences. And biomass, we saw nothing significant. And with height, we did see an increase in height with that first 2 weeks, quite a big increase. But then every couple of weeks after that, the treatment, the no GA treatment, started to catch up. And eventually, as you can kind of maybe see here today, we're not seeing any visual differences, and we're not measuring any in height differences either.
Yep. So we're in a trial here that's funded by the Southern Pulse Agronomy project and the Fixation project. So collaborative effort between GRDC, Agriculture Victoria and Mallee Sustainable Farming, amongst a significant number of other contributors. So we're here at Pyramid Hill in the north central region of Victoria. So we're about 15 kilometres northwest of Pyramid Hill, and we're on a soil type here that lends itself to be acidic in the top 10 centimetres, so about 4.5 pH in calcium chloride. So Brooke, do you want to tell me a little bit about the treatments that you've engaged in this trial here, and why you've gone about choosing those treatments?
Yeah, so the first treatment that we've just got the commercially available strain of Rhizobia. So we've just got that at a standard rate, and then we also have a treatment where we've got double the rate, and that's off the back of a lot of research that if you increase your numbers of Rhizobia, there's a better chance of survival. So in this acidic environment, the Rhizobia might not survive. So if we increase the numbers, hopefully we'll get some more there and better inoculation. So we've also got a new acid tolerant strain that SARDI have identified. And then again, we've got that at just standard rate and then double as well. And these have all been applied just as a peat slurry on the seed.
So Brooke, have you taken any sort of early assessments here, and if you have, what are you seeing in that stuff that you've taken?
Yeah, so we had a look early on at establishment and early vigour, to see if there was any differences. Didn't see too much happening there. We've also taken biomass cuts, as well as we've dug up plants and had a look at the nodulation that's happening and assessed the nodules. We've also flown the drone over.
So Brooke, you mentioned a sort of number of nodule assessments and biomass and vigour assessments that you've taken, and no doubt you'll take grain yield in a couple of months' time when the field peas have matured and it's time for harvest. But that's obviously only part of the story. Have you got any comments around N fixation and the amount of N that might be fixed for a following wheat or barley crop that we might be sowing in this paddock for the next year?
Yeah, so that's obviously a really important part of inoculating and having the pulses in the system. So we've got some canola, we had them up the back as reference plants, and so we've sent those away, as well as each treatment. We've sent them off to have a look at what N fixation is happening.
Rightio, Claire. So we've looked a lot at pulses, and Brooke touched earlier on the importance of N fixation when in the pulse phase within your farming system. So just a consideration coming out of that is how nutrition, in particular nitrogen, is managed post that pulse crop. So we're in a nitrogen management trial here. Do you want to just give us a bit of a run through on what you've established and why you've come up with the treatments you've come up with?
Yep, well, you're right, James, spot on. Nitrogen management following a pulse crop is something very important thing to get right. So we've got Scepter wheat here sown late May. We've got 6 different nitrogen treatments varying from 20 kilos of urea per hectare all the way up to the plot where James is standing right now, that's got 200 kilos of urea per hectare. To my left we've got actually 0 kilos of urea, so hopefully you can see there's a bit of a difference there. All 6 nitrogen rates were top dressed sort of at that early tillering phase in the wheat here, and then no further nitrogen. So we'll really see the potential, the yields when we bring the header in the end of the year, how they've all performed with the different levels of nitrogen.
Yeah, Claire, do you just want to touch a little bit on the starting soil end, so naturally that would be a very important part, particularly coming out of a pulse crop. So come in, really important to do soil testing to understand the level of N there to make informed decisions. So just want to touch on what we started with here and the importance of that.
Yeah, so when we soil sampled in March this year down to a depth of 1 metre, there was 55 kilos of nitrogen per hectare available for this year's crop. Now keep in mind that to produce 1 tonne of wheat you need 40 kilos of nitrogen, or that's equivalent to about 90 kilos of urea per hectare. So thinking about that and helping you determine what your potential target yield is and how much nitrogen's already in the soil. So yeah, with 55 here, we've got enough to produce just over 1 and a bit tonnes. So probably it would be needing some more nitrogen for sure.
I understand you establish your treatments using the crop modelling tool Yield Profit. Do you just want to give us a bit of a background on how that works and options to utilise that, particularly in cereal crops, but also canola and some others?
Thanks, James. Yeah, so Yield Profit is a crop modelling forecast. It's got AppSim that sits behind it, so it runs a lot of simulations. It takes into account the last 100 years of climate data, but to set it up for this paddock I put in the soil test results, so the water, the nitrogen, the pH, all the other things that we got back, and put that in, and it gave us put in our sowing date that we did, the late May date, and it gave us different probabilities of getting certain yields. So to match up those probabilities, we used the N rates that it was recommending to go with those yield potentials, and then have matched them accordingly. Yield Profit takes into account the last 100 years of climate data for a certain region. From that day forward, when you run the report, 50% probability of a certain yield outcome for that environment. So that's how we matched those N rates to spread accordingly.
You've touched a lot on grain yield, Claire, but will you measure any quality indicators through this? Like naturally protein may be a really big distinguishing factor in a situation of this nature.
Yes, protein will be measured. I guess when you're trying to get that hard wheat, you do need the higher protein. When you've got something with very limited nitrogen as well, there'll be differences in protein for sure. Also test weight and screenings may be an issue where perhaps nutrition's been lacking a bit. Screenings and lower protein can be a problem.
So here we have a herbicide matrix trial. So the reason we've established this trial is to look at how we can manage pulses as a weed in a following cereal crop, and also how we can manage broadleaf weeds when we're in the pulse phase of our farming system. So there's a number of Group G herbicides coming to market now that can be used in a knockdown capacity as a spike, and also as a pre-em option for sowing pulses. So glyphosate by itself, and then we have glyphosate with hammer added as our Group G spike. Following this, we have glyphosate with B power added as the Group G spike. And then up the top we have glyphosate with Terrador added as our Group G spike. So we can see here the benefit that the addition of a Group G spike to glyphosate when trying to manage volunteer pulses as a weed in a following season. As you can see in the bottom left hand corner there, we have PBA Jumbo 2 lentils, and then alongside to the right is PBA Hallmark lentils. So Hallmark having that Group B tolerance with the addition of Intercept sprayed across. You can really see the difference between that IMI tolerance and the non-IMI tolerant variety. We can also see Paradigm here, which is a Group B and I herbicide. So it's had really good efficacy on a number of the pulse crops. And you can see the cereals over towards the right hand side that are really safe. So again, an option for managing pulses as a weed in the following cereal crop.
We hope you've enjoyed the little virtual tour we've put together for you this afternoon.
So I'd like to acknowledge our host farmers, the GRDC and Agriculture Victoria for funding all this research and extension that's been able to be brought to you today. So thanks again to Claire, thanks again to Brooke, and yeah, thanks from myself also.